In this video, we want to talk about order of operations and complex fractions problems. So, those of you who should remember, we got the order of operations, and if we're doing them by hand, we do all the grouping symbols, the parentheses of various kinds, as well as fraction bars are grouping symbols. Then exponents, then multiplication and division as it occurs from left to right, and then addition and subtraction as it occurs from left to right. And our TI-34 multi-view calculator knows the order of operations. So what we really need to be careful with is just that we type things in exactly as we want the calculators to perform them. And usually that involves typing it in exactly as it appears on the paper. So in sample problem 1, we've got 8 plus 4 inside parentheses, which means that's going to get done first, and then times 6 plus 8. So if we were doing it by hand, we do the 8 plus 4. Whatever that sum was, we would multiply by 6. And then whatever the product of those two was, we would add the 8. So with the calculator, we just need to make sure that we type it in as it appears. So the first thing that we need to do is put in a parenthesis. And then it's 8 plus 4. And then we close the parentheses. Then times 6 and plus 8. And then hit enter. And it'll tell us that the answer is 80. So, most of the time if you're in a college course, your instructor is going to expect to see your work, but this is a great way to check your answer. Sample problem 2 is slightly more complicated. Notice that we have two different kinds of parentheses. We've got the hard brackets and then the regular parentheses. As far as the calculator is concerned, there's no difference between this parenthesis and this kind of parenthesis. So we don't want to have to try to type in a hard bracket if your calculator did have a hard bracket, which this one doesn't. But if it did, that generally means something else. So anytime you see a hard bracket or a curly bracket or a parenthesis, we just want to use the parenthesis. Also, we want to make note that this here, although it looks like a subtraction sign, which is an operator, that's really just a negative sign. So that's negative 13. And then over here, this is negative 15. And we want to make sure that we use the negative sign, or the negative sign button, and not the subtraction sign when we're trying to indicate that a number is negative. So we do negative 13 plus 3. And then we've got this hard bracket, so we want to use a parenthesis, and then 11 plus, and then a parenthesis, and then a negative 15, so negative 15 plus 10, close the parentheses, and notice that everything in this parentheses is being taken to the power of 2. So if we were to do it by hand, we would do this sum, and then we would take the sum to the power of 2. Here we just go to the power of 2, which puts the power of 2 on the outside of the parentheses. Now if we just hit our parenthesis sign for this last hard bracket, it would put it up here in the superscript, and we don't want that. So we have to exit out of that superscript by using the right arrow and then put in our parenthesis. Then if you want to check to make sure you've typed in everything correctly, you can use your arrows to scroll back through. Okay, so we've got negative 13 plus 3, a parenthesis, 11 plus another parenthesis, negative 15. And then we've got our plus 10 parenthesis to the power of 2 and our closing parenthesis. So we've got everything in correctly. And we press enter, and it tells us that the answer is 95. Examples 3 and 4 have the fraction bar as a grouping symbol. So if we were to do problem number 3 by hand, we'd have to simplify the numerator, then simplify the denominator, and our final step would be to do the division that the fraction bar indicates. With the TI-34, we just start off with an empty fraction. Now we'd like to get the absolute value in here, and that's under the math menu. So if we hit the math button, and then use our right arrow to highlight the number column. You'll notice that the first option says ABS with a parenthesis. ABS is short for absolute value, so we choose option 1. And that gives us a little set of absolute value signs. And we want 10 minus 50. Now that's all we've got for the numerator, so let's hit our down arrow to get us into the denominator. And the first thing is 6 to the power of 2 with no parentheses, so 6 to the power of 2. Then we use our right arrow to get out of the exponent. And now we do minus, and then a parenthesis, and then negative 4. Close the parenthesis, and take that to the power of 2. Now notice that if I hit the right arrow once, all it does is get me out of the exponent, but I'm still in the denominator. So hit it again. That gets us completely out of the fraction, and hit enter. And it tells us that the answer is 2. Now once again, you really do want to make sure that you're spending some time to make sure that what you've typed in is what is on your paper, because the calculator won't know that you've made an error. So it's really important before we write this solution down that we make sure that we typed it in correctly. Example 4 is called a complex fraction. So it is a fraction where the numerator and denominator have fractions in them. So we're going to start off by putting in an empty fraction, and now in the numerator I want to type in negative 1/4 plus 1/6. So I start off with a negative, and then fraction, right? So negative 1, down arrow, 4, right arrow to get out of that denominator. So I've got my negative 1/4 plus another fraction, 1, down arrow, 6, right arrow. So I've got negative 1/4 plus 1/6. Now I use my down arrow to get into the denominator. So that's negative, fraction button, 3, down arrow, 4, right arrow, minus, fraction button, 5, down arrow, 6, right arrow. Now that just got me out of the fraction 5/6. If I want completely out of this fraction, I have to hit the right arrow again. Then I press enter. And it tells me that it's 1/19.